Welcome back to Forgotten Ties. You might think you know loss. You might think you understand the hollow ache of an absence that time can't quite fill. But tonight, we're peeling back the layers of a disappearance that was never truly accepted, a wound that was never allowed to heal. This isn't just a story about a missing person. It's a story about a piece of paper, a careless scrawl, and the terrifying revelation that sometimes, the ones who leave us, are still walking among us. Meet Evelyn Vance. She's 42 years old, with eyes the color of a stormy Atlantic, perpetually tired from years of relentless, fruitless searching. Her hair, a striking, deep auburn that tumbles past her shoulders, often seems to catch the light, a stark contrast to the shadow that has clung to her life for the last 2 decades. That shadow is her older brother, Dean. Dean Vance vanished 18 years ago. No note. No warning. Just a quiet, absolute erasure from a life that had been so perfectly, maddeningly normal. He was 25 then, a carpenter with hands calloused from hard work and a laugh that could shake the dust from the rafters. Dean wasn't the type to run. He had a fiancée, a half-built house in the suburbs of Portland, and a commitment to family that was the bedrock of Evelyn's world. His disappearance was categorized by the authorities coldly, clinically, as a voluntary adult missing person case. They said he likely got overwhelmed, packed up, and started a new life. They closed the file. Evelyn never closed the file. She spent her 30s chasing ghosts. She drove across state lines after vague sightings, blew through her inheritance on private investigators who took her money and offered platitudes. Eventually, the searching became less about finding Dean and more about appeasing the relentless, roaring guilt that she hadn't done enough. Now, the setting shifts. We're not in Portland anymore. We're 5 years after the active searching stopped, 3,000 miles away, in the blistering, unforgiving heat of Scottsdale, Arizona. Evelyn had moved there for work, a sales executive role that demanded all her energy and offered a beautiful, distracting anonymity. It was a way to start over, a way to build walls so high the past couldn't climb them. But fate, my friends, is a cruel and meticulous architect. It doesn't care about your walls. It only cares about the perfect, shattering moment of collision. Evelyn was hosting a mandatory, frankly boring, client dinner at a high-end, ridiculously expensive steakhouse called the Ironwood. She was with Mr. Harrison, a man whose conversational range extended from golf to the fluctuating price of lumber. Evelyn was barely listening, her mind drifting to the meaningless minutiae of the evening. The waiter, a young man with a tired smile and a name tag that read Jake, approached their table with a check. Mr. Harrison paid with his corporate card. Evelyn watched, as she always did, the mindless ritual of the transaction. The waiter returned with the receipt, presenting the little leather folio to Mr. Harrison for the final signature. And here it is. The moment the mundane shatters and the nightmare becomes real. Mr. Harrison, bless his oblivious soul, fumbled with the pen, dropping it onto the pristine white tablecloth. As he bent to retrieve it, the receipt fluttered to the floor, landing face up, right beside Evelyn's polished leather pump. A normal person would simply pick it up and hand it to the client. Evelyn was no longer a normal person. She was a woman wired to the memory of a ghost. The receipt was a standard carbon copy, faded blue ink on cheap white paper. It had the total, a staggering $874.50 for 2 people. And then, there was the signature line. Evelyn didn't just look at it. She fell into it. The handwriting was instantly recognizable. That looping capital D that always tilted slightly to the right, the exaggerated swoop on the tail of the N, the way the V in Vance was always slightly compressed, as if Dean was trying to save space. It was a signature Evelyn hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades, yet it was burned into the deeper recesses of her visual memory, as clear as the scar above her own eyebrow. But it wasn't Dean Vance. The name scrawled above that familiar script was David Norton. The air in the expensive, oak-paneled rooms seemed to thin. The low hum of conversation, the clinking of silverware, it all sounded muffled, distant. Evelyn picked up the receipt, her hands trembling so violently she nearly ripped the thin paper. David Norton. A name she didn't know. A stranger's name. But the signature was her brother's. It was the exact same script he'd used to sign her high school yearbook, the same cramped, familiar style he'd used to sign the mortgage papers for that half-built house. A knot of pure, terrifying certainty tightened in her stomach. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a similar signature from a stranger. This was Dean. He was alive. He was here in Scottsdale. And he was living under a new name. The date on the receipt was 2 days prior. The charge was for $41.25 at a dusty, nondescript hardware store named Prescott Supply on the far side of town. It wasn't the steakhouse receipt, it was a previous transaction, likely from a few days ago, somehow stapled inside the folio by mistake, or perhaps deliberately. Evelyn forced a shallow, ragged breath. She needed to look normal. Mr. Harrison was still fumbling with the pen. She quickly slipped the Prescott Supply receipt into her purse, then calmly placed the ironwood receipt back onto the table. "Oh, my apologies, Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice sounding unnaturally high, like stretched wire. "Looks like you dropped this." He nodded, signed, and the moment passed. But for Evelyn, the world had just tilted violently on its axis. Her brother wasn't a ghost. He was an architect of a lie. Why? Why would he abandon his life, his family, his fiancée, only to resurface 3,000 miles away, signing credit card slips with a fake name but his real, unmistakable hand? The question wasn't if she would find him. The question was what she would find. And whether the ghost of Dean Vance was a man worth finding at all. This piece of paper, this cheap, accidental clue, wasn't a reunion. It was the opening of a very dangerous door. The pursuit was back on, but this time, it was driven not by hope, but by a terrifying, burning need for the truth. The search was no longer about closure, it was about confrontation. That intense, burning need for truth kept Evelyn awake, tracing the faint blue ink of the signature on the Prescott Supply receipt. She knew the authorities were useless in this scenario. 18 years and one misplaced receipt wouldn't sway them. This was hers to unravel. The next morning, Evelyn was parked outside Prescott Supply. She walked in, taking in the aisles thick with the scent of sawdust and metal. She approached the service counter, where a woman named Barb, older, with glasses resting on the tip of her nose, was organizing invoices. Evelyn fabricated a story with unnerving ease, a testament to her years of desperate searching. "My husband, David Norton, bought something here, and I need to return it, but he lost the receipt. I found this copy in the car. I was hoping you could tell me if he's a regular." Barb squinted at the receipt, then back at Evelyn. "Oh, David. David Norton. Yes, he's in here quite a bit. Buys a lot of lumber and finishing supplies. Always pays promptly. He's doing a big remodeling job, I think." Barb offered a general description: reserved, hard-working hands, always slightly dusty. "He's very good with his hands," she confirmed, unwittingly stabbing Evelyn with the cruel irony of the detail. "A carpenter." Then came the detail that confirmed her worst fears. Barb pointed to the $41.25 charge. "Funny thing, he bought this, a small wood carving chisel set. The kind you use for fine details. I asked him, 'David, what do you need that for?' He just chuckled and said, 'Making a special birthday gift.'" Dean had always hand-carved birthday gifts for Evelyn. The chisel set. It was his hallmark, the small, undeniable D in his new life. Evelyn pressed for his location. Barb was hesitant but recalled David mentioning a new, high-end development on the edge of Fountain Hills, a wealthy suburb. "He often stops here after grabbing lunch at Bistro 56, she added. Fountain Hills. 3,000 miles from Portland, but a world away from the gritty truth Evelyn was looking for. She drove out there, adopting the persona of a potential home buyer, touring the massive construction sites. She scanned every face, every man with sawdust on his jeans. She wasn't looking for the Dean she lost, she was hunting the lie he became. The guilt that had fueled her for 2 decades was rapidly calcifying into cold rage. He chose this. He chose to erase us. For a week, Evelyn waited in her rented SUV near Bistro 56. On the 8th day, just as she was considering abandoning the spot, he arrived. He stepped out of a nondescript, beat-up pickup truck. He had changed. A rough beard, streaked with premature gray at the temples, framed a face that was permanently tired. His hair was close-cropped, short, and practical. But as he reached up to rub the back of his neck before heading into the bistro, Evelyn saw it, the signature gesture, Dean's characteristic habit before any difficult task. It was Dean. But the light in his eyes, that mischievous, bright green spark, was gone. David Norton's eyes were guarded, heavy with the weight of years of pretense. Evelyn couldn't move. She was paralyzed by the realization that she had not found a ghost. She had found an actor who willingly took the stage. The imagined reunion, the tears, the explanation of a kidnapping, a forced separation, dissolved into the bitter acid of betrayal. As Dean emerged from the bistro, he was not alone. A woman, Sarah, dark-haired and bright-eyed, was with him. She was laughing, her arm looped naturally through his. This wasn't a secret affair or a brief fling. This was domesticity. This was a life. A life built, thread by thread, in direct opposition to the pain he had caused. Evelyn followed them through the suburban maze. The truck finally pulled up to a modest, well-maintained ranch house, not a mansion, but a home. As they exited the vehicle, a child, a boy of about 7, with messy brown curls, burst out the front door. "Dad," he yelled, launching himself into Dean's arms. Evelyn slumped against the steering wheel, her breath catching in her throat. A son. Dean had a son. A clean slate, a new family, all founded on the utter annihilation of his past. Her rage reached a terrifying new level of clarity. The missing person case was dead. This was a criminal investigation, fueled by a sister's searing sense of injustice. As Evelyn slowly drove away, she noticed a small, custom-carved wooden sign nailed to the wall of the garage, the kind of sign that was a labor of love. The engraving was subtle, just a date and a tiny initial, DN. The carving chisel set. The details were screaming the truth, a truth Dean was trying to mute with a fake name and a new family. Evelyn now knew she would not just confront him. She would shatter his perfect deception. The facade was cracked, and Evelyn was ready to tear it down. Back in her hotel room, she poured every last cent of her resources into a high-level background check service, one that went deeper than standard public records. She searched David Norton, focusing her query on the years surrounding Dean's disappearance. The results were cryptic until she found a death record flagged by the system's cross-referencing algorithm. A man named David Norton, born in Pittsburgh, died in a single-car accident in rural Oregon in 2007, 3 months before Dean Vance vanished from Portland. Evelyn gasped, clutching her chest. This was not a random alias. This was identity theft rooted in a corpse. Dean's disappearance was directly linked to this accident. He hadn't just run away, he had taken the life and name of a dead man. The emotional turmoil of finding him alive was instantly replaced by a stark, paralyzing fear. Her brother was not just a liar and a traitor, he was implicated in a death. She drove back to Dean's house the next afternoon. This time, she didn't wait in the car. She walked directly to the front door, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She was not a sister seeking a reunion, she was an executioner of lies. Sarah, the woman, opened the door. She looked lovely, but her eyes were weary. Evelyn bypassed pleasantries. "I'm looking for David Norton. I'm an old acquaintance from Oregon. It's urgent." Sarah's smile instantly evaporated, replaced by genuine fear. "David isn't here right now." But he was. Dean stepped out from the hallway in simple, sweat-stained clothes. He saw Evelyn, and the blood drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly white. "Evelyn," he whispered, the name a rusty sound in his throat. "Don't you dare call me that," Evelyn hissed, stepping over the threshold uninvited. She pulled out the crinkled Prescott Supply receipt, waving it like a criminal warrant. "I want to know, David Norton, why my brother's signature is on the credit card receipt of a dead man?" Dean's composure shattered. Sarah took a stumbling step back, her hand flying to her mouth. "What are you talking about?" Dean stammered, trying a final, desperate bluff. "Enough, Dean." Evelyn cut him off, her voice rising to a terrible, controlled volume. David Norton died in a crash in Oregon in 2007. I have the records. You didn't just run from us. You stole a dead man's life. You built this beautiful, perfect little lie on the grave of another man. Sarah looked at Dean, her face a mask of horror. David, what is she saying? Who is Dean? Dean didn't look at Sarah. He stared at Evelyn, his eyes wet and pleading. Go, Evelyn. Please. I'll call you. I'll explain everything. You had 18 years to explain. Evelyn roared, her control finally snapping. Our parents died heartbroken. Your fiancé never married. What did you do, Dean? Did you kill David Norton and stage the wreck? The boy, Dean's son, came running from the living room, drawn by the raised voices. Dad, what's wrong? The sound of the boy's voice broke the final tension. Dean looked at his son, and the raw desperation in his eyes solidified into cold finality. He moved swiftly, physically forcing Evelyn back onto the porch. I don't know who you are, Dean said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Get off my property now, or I'm calling the police. Call them, Evelyn shot back, tears streaming down her face. They'll find one dead man in Oregon and one thriving carpenter in Arizona with the exact same handwriting. You cannot run your signature, Dean. He slammed the door. Evelyn was left shaking, the confrontation achieved, but the price, her peace of mind, was utterly destroyed. She had exposed the lie, but she still didn't have the why. Yet, before the door closed, Evelyn had noticed one small, vital detail inside, a framed photo of Dean, Sarah, and the boy. And underneath, a small, handwritten caption, Family. December 3, 2012. 4500 East Mesa Drive, Phoenix. It was the address of the house where they had lived before. Dean had been forced to leave one breadcrumb, an unerasable link to his immediate past. And that was where Evelyn would go next. The small address written beneath the family photo, 4500 East Mesa Drive, Phoenix, became Evelyn's new focus. She knew the police process would be slow, so she took a gamble. First, she anonymously tipped off the Portland Cold Case Unit, detailing the identity theft and linking Dean Vance to the deceased David Norton. Then, she drove to the Phoenix address. It was a rundown duplex, mostly abandoned. Evelyn found a grizzled, elderly tenant named Gus, who, after a small cash bribe, pointed to a bolted door. That David Norton fella, Gus grumbled. He lived here a few years back. Built a small storage space in the basement. Kept all his old junk down there. Then he just vanished. Said he was moving to Fountain Hills. In the damp, shadowy basement, Evelyn found a wooden trunk secured with a rusty padlock. A lock Dean had taught her how to pick with a bobby pin when they were children. She worked it open. Inside was the archive of the lie, old clothes, photo albums, and, crucially, a journal and a file folder. The journal belonged to David Norton. The entries were dated in the weeks leading up to his death. David Norton was desperate, mired in debt to dangerous people. He had been planning to run away and disappear. Then Evelyn opened the file folder. It contained the Oregon police report on David Norton's fatal accident. They had concluded it was a single-car crash caused by drunk driving. But tucked beneath the report was a crumpled, handwritten letter. It was Dean's writing. Undated. It began, Evelyn, if you are reading this, I have failed. Dean wrote that he hadn't killed David Norton. He had been driving home late from a remote carpentry job when a speeding car, driven by a drunken David Norton, swerved into him. Dean was uninjured, but David died instantly. Dean, in a panic and knowing his own lack of insurance and the high likelihood of prosecution, had seen David, who was physically similar, and had a moment of terrible, self-preserving madness. He swapped their clothing, placed David's wallet in his own pocket, and staged the scene to make it look like David was the driver of Dean's beat-up truck. Dean wasn't running from a murder. He was running from the consequences of a fatal accident and the cold, terrifying impulse of self-preservation. He knew the police would look at David's history, the debts, the intent to flee, and they would believe David was the one who crashed and died. Dean never meant to kill anyone, but he committed the ultimate act of abandoning his identity. Evelyn drove back to Scottsdale, the letter burning in her hand. She didn't call the police again. She arranged one final meeting with Dean via an anonymous email at a deserted park late that night, the basement on Mesa Drive. You know the place. Dean was there, alone, trembling. He saw the trunk's contents in Evelyn's hands. You know, he whispered. Evelyn handed him David Norton's journal and his own letter. You didn't kill him, Dean. You did something worse. You killed the hope in our family and the integrity of your own soul. Dean finally broke. He confessed, explaining the panic, the overwhelming fear, the selfish need to protect Sarah, who he insisted knew nothing of his past. He couldn't let his new life, his innocent son, be destroyed by a single moment of cowardice. In that moment of tearful confession, headlights flashed. They weren't the local police. They were the Portland detectives who had been monitoring David Norton's email activity since Evelyn's initial tip, using the park meeting as their bait. Dean looked at Evelyn as the handcuffs clicked into place. There was no accusation in his eyes, only profound sadness. You did the right thing, he murmured, a final, painful acknowledgement of his sister's relentless pursuit of truth. Evelyn had found her brother. She had unearthed the truth. Dean Vance was not a ghost. He was a man who had buried himself under a mountain of lies to escape justice. He saved his physical life at the cost of his moral one. David Norton was finally laid to rest under his own name. Dean Vance faced charges of vehicular manslaughter and falsifying records, but thanks to Evelyn's evidence of his panic, his sentence might be less severe. Evelyn finally achieved closure, but lost her brother for the second and final time. And that is where the story ends, a reminder that forgotten ties never truly disappear, they are merely disguised. A credit card receipt. A signature. It was enough to unravel 18 years of deceit. If this story sent chills down your spine, if it makes you wonder what secrets the people closest to you might be keeping, then remember this. The truth always finds its light, even if it's written in faded ink on a discarded slip of paper. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Forgotten Ties to never miss a story of unresolved mystery. And most importantly, hit that notification bell so you're the first to know when the next truth is uncovered. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.